Hey there guys, it's Professor Oleander here. I think what I want to do today is make up sort of a tutorial of sorts. It's more for my benefit than anything else, but I just wanted to kind of pass on a few things that I'd picked up over the course of working on SFM. So I figured the best way to do that would be for me to go through and show you how I do posters. And to me, if you learn how to make a really good poster, it will help you make a really good movie, because you're learning how the models work, you're learning what their limits are, you're learning how best to frame them in a shot. And since a movie is just a series of shots, you're better off learning how to make really good posters, so that whenever it does come to make movies, you know how to frame them and how to light them and everything like that. So to start off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be showing you guys how I made this particular poster right here. There's a couple tricks that I used with it, namely how to get the medigun on the medic, playing around with particles and just getting it framed. So what we're going to do is go ahead and get started. I'm going to make a camera just by pushing C and switch over here to the camera and go out here, pick somewhere to shoot it. Now this map is to Fortnite, and if you don't have it, I will post a link in the description that will take you to where you can download it from. I got it off of SFM box, which is a very handy place if you're looking for stuff for resources for source filmmaker. There's also the Facepunch Studios SFM forum. There's a lot of guys on there that make models and have a lot of good stuff. They've also got a lot of good input that you can use to do better basically with SFM. So the first thing that you want to do is pick up a spot where you want to film from. And this is probably the most important part, because it's going to set up how you set up your shot, period. The things you want to be looking for is ways to frame it right. Now, I'm going to go ahead and show you this. A lot of people want to do this. Let me get it here. Something like that. Okay, there's a thing called the rule of thirds. And you notice that if I were to divide this screen up into thirds, let me get into the animation set so I can show you. If I were to divide the screen up into thirds, where there's a third line here, and there's a third line here, and there's a third line here, and a third line here, that's what's called framing on the thirds. Now this shot is framed on the thirds. Excuse me. Nobody would dispute that. It's framed on a thirds. But it also looks flat. Let me disable the lighting so that way it shows up better. It also looks very flat. And the reason why it looks flat is because you're only showing 2 dimensions of it. You can see the height here and you can see the width, but you can't see a whole lot of depth. Now you can see the stuff that's behind it, but it's not showing up very well. And that's because, one, you're not looking at it lengthwise and you're not able to actually see the depth of it. And when we get into lighting, I'll show you that you can't even see the shadows of it. So it's really hard to tell what's flat and what isn't, because some of this stuff is. Some of these, not these boards, but these boards over here, they're all flat. They have material on it that is painted and it's shaded in such a way to make it look like it's 3D, but they're actually 2D. So coming back over here, I've got a little bit of a cold, so you guys will have to excuse me. So coming here, you can take this exact same shot and make it look 3-dimensional by turning it. It's still relatively framed on the thirds. You've got a third line here, and you've got a third line here, and you've got another third line here, and another third line here, but you can actually tell this post has got depth to it. This post has got depth to it. And you can somewhat see some of the depth that's on this one. So it's important, the very first thing that you do, aside from choosing the map, which if you think of working in Source Filmmaker and making a poster is working like a canvas, the most important step is to choose your canvas. Well, your canvas is your map. The next thing is to figure out where you want to film from, which for this particular one, we're going to come over here to the blue side, and I'm going to re-enable the lighting for just a second so I can see what I'm doing. Now you notice that this map's got the red side very dark and the blue side pretty light. We're going to go on the blue side because we're going to be using a red heavy and a red medic. So pick a spot where you want to film from, and I think I'm going to do something about like this one here. A little bit more this way. Come on. And what I usually do is I go ahead and make an animation set for the camera. So right click over here and open existing elements and camera. I'm also going to go ahead and change the lenses on this one. I usually do between 35 and 85. It's very rare that I go to 105 millimeter. So open up the lens tab, and I think for this one I was between 50 and 85. Just going back for a reference, yeah, I'm pretty sure I was between 50 and 85. So let's drop down, and this isn't really a hard... I'm not setting this camera up and let this camera be the gospel, where it's got to be set up like this forever and ever and ever, amen. I'm using it as a guideline. And I think something about like that. I want to get, there's a post over here, I want to get it out of the shot. Something like that. Alright, now let me go back into the work camera for a second because I want to show you guys something. Zoom out a little bit. Now, you may run into this problem, you may not. For some reason it happens in my Sports Filmmaker more than it ought to. Now notice these lights up here. They're supposed to be a volumetric cone that comes out of these lights, and there's also supposed to be one that comes out of these guys over here. And it's not there. So to bring it up, I'm going to go into the game for a second and just run out there. Now see how these guys have got the volumetric cones? I don't know why Source Filmmaker won't draw it. I've tried to make it draw it, but there's no command as far as I know that'll do it. I just kind of go down the bridge here so that way everything sees it. For whatever reason, even if you go into the game mode and you go right back out of the game mode, it won't show up. So I try and go where I'm filming, and you see the cones up there and everything. So I'm just going to get him back here so he's out of the way. Go back. And why didn't they show up? Well, crap. That usually works. So let's go in here for a second. Usually draw entities, entity particles. That's not it. I don't know. For whatever reason they're not showing up, so I'll see if I can figure it out and put it into the next tutorial. But usually if I'm looking at them... Ah, there it is. That must be what it is. You have to be looking at them, or you have to be in proximity to them. I can actually see them. They're still there now. So if I move stuff around. Good. I was wondering why that didn't work, but it's working now. Now, usually I have the primary viewport over here with my camera over on a different monitor. I don't have my other monitor hooked up, and for your guys' benefit, I'm going to leave it like that. I usually put it over here and it's going to minimize, and I just use the work camera to move around. So, now that we've got the shot framed, we have an idea of where we want to put it. Now notice I'm not using thirds in this. There's a very specific reason for that. You can either frame your shots off of the set, or you can frame your shots off of what's in it. And for this one, I'm going to frame it off of what's in it. So let's go ahead and get the models in. So come over here, new models, and I want the HWM models for the medic. And there's our medic. And I want to put him somewhere here. If you don't like working in the dark, you can do that if you're afraid of the dark or whatever. It's sometimes looking in a dark map, it's easier just to go ahead and turn off the lighting, period. So you can see, I didn't know about that at the time whenever I first started working in SFM. And when I was working the dark maps, I had to set up a light somewhere just so I could see what the hell I was doing. And back in the early days, when I didn't know anything. I still don't know anything, but I'm still doing this. So I want the medic to be pretty much on the third line. I'm just figuring out where he's going to look good at, because remember, I'm going to move the camera a little bit to shore it up. The camera's just there to give me an idea of what it looks like, and if I start putting stuff in it and I say, hey, it looks better from that side, then I just go back and move the camera. I don't like being fixed to a camera position, because 9 times out of 10 you're going to find a better way to film something. So we're going to go back over here and bring in a heavy, and if Source Filmmaker doesn't crash, there it is. Sometimes it's slower than others. I don't know why. I think it's got to refresh itself from some time. You guys will probably know this. If you want to plunk a guy down onto a map, especially if they're root transformers at the base of the model, which the Valve models typically are, I'm going to grab the center transform here on the transform manipulator jack and hit shift, and he will move to the ground. And I want to get him somewhere about right there, and turn him a little bit. Turn back, something like that. Now notice that they're relatively on the thirds. The medic is, by the way, if you were wondering how I did this, this is the Lasso Tool, and the way you do it is you hold down Control when you're in the viewport and just click and drag, and that's how it works. I use it a lot if I want to, if I want to draw a line on a third and I want to figure out if these guys are, see how their shoulders are in line. That's how I find out if I've got something framed right. I also know that the medic, he's on a third. The heavy, he's pretty much on a third. Their waists in here are a little high. I'm going to change that in just a second. I'm going to frame up the heavy just up. I hate it when SFM does that. That's what happens when you hold shift. Come here. There. Stop. Stop. There. I swear they took away the F hotkey, but they left that shift hotkey there. What that was me. I have a bad habit of hitting shift before I click. And if you hit shift before you click, you can scrub through the playhead. And if you click and drag, you start moving the time frame selection. And it's an aggravating thing because you need shift to move these guys. And I have a bad habit of hitting shift before I click on the transform. And then it does crazy mess. So, aside from my unprofessionalism like that, let's move him back. One thing that I'm going to do is I want to make the medic very big in the frame because I want him to be the center of attention. As you can notice in this one, I try to keep him very big. If you look at the amount of the frame that the medic takes up, it's quite a bit. If you stop about right there, and then the heavy takes up this much. And I wanted the medic to be the center of attention because, come on, you know. What medic hasn't wanted to do this, where the heavy's actually back here doing all the work and the medic's just out there just kind of giving everybody hell? So, same thing I'm going to be doing with this. I'm going to keep the medic pretty big in the frame. I want to... Well, let me do this. Let me move the camera. Drop the camera down. I want to get rid of this negative area that's up here. This dead space. It's also going to shore him up a little bit so that way he doesn't have a whole lot of headroom. I want it to be fairly tight on these guys, so I'm just going to push X and drop the camera down just a bit. Because you got to remember, these guys are going to squat down a little bit once we put animation on them. And so yeah, and plus I want to get their feet. I'm probably going to have to drop it down again, but for right now that's going to work. and they're still relatively on the third lines here. I also want the heavy to be smaller just because he's a bigger model, and he has a tendency to dominate over the medic here because the medic's very skinny. Even though he's tall, the heavy just takes up more of the frame because he's a freaking Russian bear. So I'm going to leave it at that for right now. I'm probably going to end up moving it a little bit more. Let's see, a little bit over 15 minutes into it. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this video up. I'm going to go through the entire process of making the thing, but I'm going to break it down into parts. So I'll call this section framing, and we'll go on to the next one where we'll actually be adding models in and putting animation on these guys. I'm going to use the shortcut, and I'm not going to do a whole lot of posing on them. I may tweak a little bit, but for the most part I'm just going to excuse me, put animation sets onto them and tweak them, which we'll get into that in a later lesson. So for right now, I'm going to leave it at this. We've got a shot framed, and when we come back, we'll start posing these guys and putting animation into it. So see you in the next video.